My husband cheated with our son's girlfriend. They both vanished, then returned. Now she's pregnant with his baby. I thought the betrayal was over, but what he confessed next shattered whatever pieces of trust remained, setting off a chain of events that would leave our entire family in ruins. Mom, Dad's truck is gone and so is Sophia. Kyle's panicked voice cut through the morning silence as I stood in our empty bedroom, staring at Adam's half-empty closet. My husband of 22 years had vanished overnight, and my son's 19-year-old girlfriend had disappeared at the exact same time. The sickening truth crashed over me as I noticed the missing suitcases and the note on my dresser that would change everything. But 12 hours earlier, we'd been the picture-perfect family that everyone in Willowbrook Estates envied. I'm Brittany Thompson, a 43-year-old high school guidance counselor who thought she had it all figured out. Our two-story colonial on Maple Street was the crown jewel of our neighborhood: white picket fence, manicured lawn, and those flower beds I spent every Saturday morning perfecting. Adam's construction company had built nearly half the homes in our subdivision, and when people drove through, they'd point to our house and whisper, "That's what success looks like." Just last night I'd been humming while preparing dinner, completely oblivious to the storm brewing in my own home. Adam had called around 5, his voice cheerful as always. "Working late tonight, honey. Big client meeting tomorrow, need to finish these blueprints." Nothing unusual there. He'd been putting in extra hours lately, expanding his business into high-end residential projects. I'd saved him a plate of his favorite meatloaf and mashed potatoes, covering it with foil and leaving it in the fridge with a little love note. Kyle had been upstairs in his room, door closed, music playing softly. When I'd knocked around 8 to offer him some leftover dessert, I'd heard muffled voices and assumed he was video chatting with friends. "I'm good, Mom," he'd called out. "Just studying." His senior year was demanding, and I was proud of how seriously he was taking his final semester. State University had already accepted him for engineering, and we were all excited about his bright future. The evening had unfolded exactly like thousands of others over the past 2 decades. I'd graded papers at the kitchen table, caught up on laundry, and watched my favorite cooking show before heading to bed around 10:30. Adam's side of the bed was still empty, but that wasn't unusual during busy seasons. I'd fallen asleep to the sound of rain pattering against our bedroom windows, completely secure in my perfect little world. What I didn't know was that my husband had been home much earlier than his supposed work schedule suggested. While I was folding laundry in the basement, Adam had quietly entered through our garage, grabbed 2 large suitcases from our storage room, and methodically packed his belongings. He'd taken his passport, birth certificate, and other important documents from our home office safe. Most telling of all, he'd cleaned out the emergency cash we kept hidden in our bedroom, nearly $3,000 that was meant for true emergencies. The timeline I'd later pieced together was devastating. While I'd been saving him dinner and humming contentedly, Adam had been executing a plan that had probably been months in the making. Kyle's muffled voices hadn't been a study group call, they'd been heated arguments with Sophia about timing, logistics, and the bomb they were about to drop on our family. Sophia Williams had entered our lives 6 months earlier like a bright ray of sunshine. Kyle, my gentle 18-year-old son who'd always been shy around girls, had fallen completely head over heels for this stunning 19-year-old college freshman. She was everything a mother hopes her son's first serious girlfriend will be: intelligent, polite, ambitious, and genuinely kind to everyone she met. I remember the first time Kyle brought her home. It was a crisp October afternoon, and I was raking leaves in our front yard when they pulled up in Kyle's beat-up Honda Civic. Sophia stepped out wearing a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, her long blonde hair catching the autumn sunlight. She was breathtakingly beautiful, but what struck me most was her confidence. At 19, she carried herself with a poise that many women twice her age never achieve. "Mrs. Thompson," she'd said, walking directly over to me with her hand extended, "I'm Sophia Williams. Kyle has told me so many wonderful things about you." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and her eyes held an intelligence that impressed me immediately. Kyle stood behind her, practically glowing with pride and nervousness. That first dinner together had been magical. Sophia complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions about Kyle's childhood, and even engaged Adam in detailed conversations about sustainable construction practices. "I'm studying environmental science," she'd explained, and I'm fascinated by how building techniques can either help or harm our ecosystem. Adam's face had lit up as he described his latest project using recycled materials and energy-efficient designs. Throughout that meal, I'd watched Kyle beam with happiness every time Sophia laughed at his jokes or touched his arm while making a point. After they left for the movies, Adam and I had cleaned dishes together, both commenting on how mature and impressive Kyle's new girlfriend seemed. "She's going to be good for him," Adam had said, drying a plate with more enthusiasm than the task required. Smart girls challenge boys to become better men. Over the following months, Sophia became a fixture in our home. She'd arrive early for dates with Kyle and chat with me about her college courses while he finished getting ready. She'd help me set the table for family dinners, always insisting on contributing something: homemade bread, a salad, or flowers from her dorm's garden. During family movie nights, she'd curl up next to Kyle on our sectional sofa, sharing popcorn and commenting thoughtfully on whatever film we'd chosen. What I failed to notice during those cozy family evenings were the subtle changes occurring in my husband. Adam, who'd been content with his appearance for decades, suddenly developed an interest in fitness and fashion. He joined the local gym, started buying expensive cologne, and traded his comfortable weekend clothes for fitted jeans and stylish button-down shirts. When I complimented his new look, he'd kiss my cheek and say, "Just trying to keep up with my beautiful wife." His phone became a constant companion, something that should have raised red flags for a man who'd previously used technology only when absolutely necessary. During dinner, at church, even while watching television together, Adam would check messages with an urgency that seemed excessive for construction business. When I'd tease him about being glued to his device, he'd explain that social media marketing had become essential for staying competitive. The most obvious warning sign I'd missed was Adam's sudden eagerness to help Kyle and Sophia with transportation and other needs. Sophia's car developed frequent mysterious problems: strange noises, warning lights, maintenance issues that conveniently required Adam's expertise. He'd volunteer to drive her to campus, pick her up from work, or take her car to his trusted mechanic. Kyle would thank his father for being so helpful, never noticing how Adam's demeanor changed when Sophia climbed into his passenger seat. Their conversations grew longer and more intense as months passed. I'd find them in our garage, Sophia listening intently while Adam explained technical aspects of construction projects. These discussions would continue in our kitchen, Adam leaning against the counter with coffee, Sophia perched on a bar stool, both so engrossed in their exchange that they barely acknowledged my presence. At the time, I'd thought it was wonderful that my husband was mentoring Kyle's girlfriend, sharing his professional knowledge with someone who appreciated his expertise. The final months before their disappearance had been filled with small incidents that my trusting nature had explained away. I'd found unfamiliar lipstick in Adam's truck, coral pink, a shade I'd never worn. When questioned, he'd casually mentioned giving our interior designer friend Sarah a ride to a job site. Credit card statements showed restaurant charges at upscale downtown establishments during lunch hours when Adam claimed to be working. He'd explained these as client meetings, part of his strategy to land higher-end residential contracts. Most disturbing in hindsight were Sophia's increasingly personal questions about our marriage. She'd ask Kyle about our relationship dynamics, then weave those details into family conversations. "Kyle says you two never fight. That's so inspiring." Or, "Kyle mentioned that Mr. Thompson works late sometimes. Marriage must require such patience." These observations had felt slightly invasive, but I'd attributed them to her psychology coursework and natural curiosity about healthy adult relationships. The night before their disappearance, we'd hosted our monthly neighborhood poker game. Adam had been his usual charming self, joking with the other husbands while I served homemade cookies and coffee. Sophia had stopped by around 9 to pick up a textbook Kyle had borrowed, staying just long enough to charm our guests with her intelligence and warmth. Mrs. Patterson had pulled me aside in the kitchen to gush about how lucky Kyle was to have such a mature, beautiful girlfriend. As I now stood in our bedroom, staring at the note that would shatter my world, I realized that every moment of our perfect family facade had been carefully constructed theater. The happy marriage, the supportive father, the sweet girlfriend, all of it had been elaborate lies designed to hide a betrayal so comprehensive that it would destroy not just my marriage, but my son's first experience with love and trust. The note on my dresser was brief but devastating. "Brittany, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Sophia and I are in love. We're starting a new life together. Don't try to find us. Adam. 22 years of marriage dismissed in 3 sentences. My perfect family facade hadn't just cracked. It had completely crumbled, revealing the ugly truth that had been festering beneath our beautiful surface all along. The note crumpled in my trembling hands as Kyle's footsteps thundered up the stairs. I could hear him calling Adam's name, checking every room, his voice growing more desperate with each empty space he discovered. When he burst into our bedroom, his face was flushed and his eyes wild with panic. "Mom, where is he? His truck's not in the driveway, but all his work gear is still in the garage." Kyle's voice cracked as he took in the scene, my tear-streaked face, the half-empty closet, the wrinkled note in my fist. "What's happening?" I opened my mouth to explain, but no words came. "How do you tell your 18-year-old son that his father and girlfriend have destroyed your family in the cruelest way imaginable?" Instead, I just held out the note with shaking fingers. Kyle read it once, then twice, his face transforming from confusion to horror to raw anguish. "No," he whispered, sinking onto our bed. "No, this can't be real. Sophia wouldn't. Dad wouldn't." His voice trailed off as the implications crashed over him. But this devastating morning was actually the culmination of a weekend that had already shattered my son's world. 3 days earlier, Kyle had come home from what should have been a romantic Friday night date with Sophia, and instead found himself facing the first real heartbreak of his young life. I'd been grading papers in the living room when I heard his key in the front door around 9:30. That was unusual. His Friday dates with Sophia typically lasted much later, often ending with late-night movies or long conversations in our driveway. When Kyle walked in, I immediately knew something was terribly wrong. His face was blotchy and red, his eyes swollen from crying. He clutched his phone in one hand, staring at the screen as if it contained some horrible truth he couldn't quite accept. When he saw me looking up from my papers, his composure completely crumbled. "She broke up with me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Over text message, Mom. 6 months together and she couldn't even do it in person." I set my papers aside and opened my arms, and Kyle collapsed into them like he had when he was a little boy with scraped knees. But this wasn't a wound that bandages could fix. His sobs shook his entire body as he showed me the message on his phone. "Kyle, I need space to figure things out. Dating feels too immature for where I am in life right now. I hope you understand. Please don't contact me for a while." The coldness of those words made my heart ache for my son. This was the girl who'd spent months telling him how mature and wonderful he was, who'd praised his intelligence and kindness at every family dinner. Now she was dismissing him as immature, as if their entire relationship had been some kind of mistake. We sat on the kitchen floor together. I don't remember how we ended up there while Kyle poured out his heartbreak. He questioned everything about himself, wondering if he wasn't smart enough, sophisticated enough, or experienced enough for someone like Sophia. "Maybe she's right," he said through his tears. "Maybe I am just a kid compared to her college friends." I made him hot chocolate, the same comfort drink I'd prepared for every childhood crisis, and we stayed up until nearly 3 in the morning while Kyle dissected every moment of their relationship. He searched for signs he'd missed, conversations that might have hinted at her dissatisfaction, moments when he'd somehow failed to meet her expectations. "She seemed different this week," he admitted, curled up in the corner of our sectional with a throw blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "Distant. Like her mind was somewhere else when we were together. But when I asked if something was wrong, she just said she was stressed about midterms." What troubled me most during that long night wasn't just Kyle's pain, but Adam's reaction to our son's crisis. When Adam finally came home from his supposed late work session around midnight, finding Kyle and me in the kitchen with tissues and empty mugs, his response was shockingly unsympathetic. "Rough night?" he asked, but his tone was more irritated than concerned. When I explained what had happened, Adam shrugged and said, "Young love. These things happen. He'll get over it." Kyle looked up at his father with wounded eyes. "Dad, I really loved her." "Sure you did, buddy," Adam replied, but he was already checking his phone, scrolling through messages with more interest than he was showing his heartbroken son. "But you're 18. Trust me, there'll be plenty of other girls." I stared at my husband in shock. Where was the compassionate father who'd helped Kyle through every other crisis in his life? Where was the man who'd spent hours teaching our son to ride a bike, helping with homework, and offering gentle wisdom about growing up? Instead, Adam seemed almost eager to dismiss Kyle's pain and move the conversation elsewhere. "So what are Sophia's plans now?" he asked, still focused on his phone. "Is she dropping out of college? Moving back home?" The question struck me as odd. Why would Adam care about Sophia's future plans when his son was sitting right there, devastated by her rejection? Kyle didn't seem to notice his father's strange priorities, but something cold began growing in my stomach. "I don't know," Kyle said miserably. "She said she needed space. Maybe she's transferring schools or something." Adam nodded, but I caught something in his expression, not sympathy for Kyle but almost relief. Before I could analyze it further, he announced he was heading to bed and disappeared upstairs, leaving me to comfort our broken son alone. The next 2 days passed in a blur of Kyle's depression and my growing concern about Adam's bizarre behavior. While I tried to support Kyle through his first real heartbreak, Adam seemed more interested in monitoring his phone and asking casual questions about Sophia's whereabouts. Sunday evening, I found Adam in his home office, speaking quietly into his phone. When he saw me in the doorway, he quickly ended the call and claimed it was a client discussing Monday's job schedule. But it was nearly 10 p.m. on a Sunday. What client would be calling about work at that hour? "Everything okay?" I asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Fine," he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Just trying to stay ahead of this week's projects." Monday morning brought Kyle's panicked discovery that Sophia had vanished from her dorm room. Her roommate told him that Sophia had packed her belongings Sunday night, leaving only a brief note for the resident advisor about taking time off from school for personal reasons. When Kyle called me from campus, his voice was raw with fresh panic. "Mom, what if something happened to her? What if she's in trouble? Should I call the police?" Even as I tried to calm him down, my mind was racing. The timing was too coincidental, Sophia disappearing just days after breaking Kyle's heart, just hours before Adam's own mysterious vanishing act. But I couldn't voice these suspicions to Kyle, not when he was already shattered. That Monday evening, as Kyle paced our living room trying to decide whether to drive to Sophia's hometown to check on her, I watched Adam carefully. He sat in his recliner, supposedly reading a construction magazine, but I noticed he never turned a page. His attention was focused on Kyle's anguished phone calls to Sophia's friends, his attempts to reach her through social media, his growing desperation to understand what had happened. What chilled me was that Adam didn't look worried or sympathetic. He looked calculating. Like he was monitoring the situation, gathering information, waiting for something. Now, standing in our bedroom with that devastating note in my hands, all those strange moments suddenly made perfect sense. Adam hadn't been surprised by Kyle's heartbreak because he'd orchestrated it. He hadn't been concerned about Sophia's disappearance because he'd planned it. Every odd behavior, every dismissive comment, every late-night phone call had been part of a deception so cruel that it defied comprehension. Kyle was still staring at the note, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and crushing sadness. "They planned this together," he said finally, his voice hollow. "While I was crying over losing her, she was planning to run away with my dad." The sound of my son's broken spirit was more devastating than any pain I'd ever experienced. In one weekend, Kyle had lost his first love, his faith in relationships, and his hero father. And I'd lost the husband I'd trusted for 22 years and the secure life we'd built together. Neither of us knew that this was just the beginning of our nightmare. By Tuesday afternoon, when Adam still hadn't returned any of my frantic calls or texts, I made the decision that would transform us from victims into suspects. I called the police. Officer Martinez arrived at our house within an hour, a young patrolman who took notes while I explained the situation. He seemed sympathetic at first, asking routine questions about Adam's habits, his mental state, and any recent stresses in our marriage. When I mentioned finding Sophia's breakup text on Kyle's phone and her simultaneous disappearance, Officer Martinez's expression shifted subtly. "So your husband left the same weekend your son's girlfriend broke up with him?" he asked, his pen hovering over his notepad. "Yes, but I don't think," I began, but he cut me off. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come down to the station tomorrow morning. Detective Morgan will want to speak with you about this case." The way he said case made my blood run cold. Adam had been missing for less than 48 hours, and they were already treating his disappearance as something criminal. Wednesday morning at the police station changed everything. Detective Morgan was a stern woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through every word I spoke. The interview room was exactly like something from a crime show: white walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal table that felt ice-cold under my palms. "Mrs. Thompson," Detective Morgan began, her voice devoid of warmth, "tell me about your marriage. Any recent arguments? Financial problems? Infidelity concerns?" I explained about our strong relationship, our shared goals, our involvement in the community. But with every positive thing I said, Detective Morgan's expression grew more skeptical, as if happiness itself was evidence of guilt. 22 years is a long time," she said, leaning back in her chair. "People change. Maybe Adam wanted out and you couldn't accept it." "That's not what happened," I insisted, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. "What about life insurance, Mrs. Thompson? How much is your husband worth dead?" The question felt like a physical blow. "You think I hurt him? You think I'm capable of?" "I think desperate people do desperate things," Detective Morgan interrupted. "Especially when there's money involved." For the next 2 hours she dissected every aspect of our marriage, our finances, and our family dynamics. She asked about Adam's business assets, our joint bank accounts, and whether we'd been arguing about Kyle's relationship with Sophia. Every answer I gave seemed to deepen her suspicions rather than clarify the truth. "Here's what I think happened," Detective Morgan said finally. "Your husband was having an affair with your son's girlfriend. You found out, confronted him, things got heated, and maybe you did something you regret." "No," I shouted, standing up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. "Adam left willingly. He took his clothes, his passport, his—" "So you say," she replied calmly. "But we only have your word for that, don't we?" I left the police station feeling dirty and violated, as if my grief had been twisted into something ugly and suspicious. But the real humiliation was yet to come. Thursday morning, I was drinking coffee and trying to comfort Kyle before school when cars began pulling up outside our house. Through our kitchen window, I watched in horror as police officers unloaded equipment from their vehicles while Detective Morgan approached our front door with papers in her hand. "Search warrant," she announced when I opened the door, thrusting the document toward me. "We need to examine the premises for evidence related to Adam Thompson's disappearance." What followed was the most degrading experience of my life. Officers wearing latex gloves invaded every room of our home, treating our personal belongings like potential murder weapons. They photographed our bedroom, dusted Adam's dresser for fingerprints, and carefully bagged items from our bathroom: his toothbrush, razor, and prescription bottles. In our bedroom, they examined the carpet with magnifying glasses, looking for blood stains that didn't exist. They stripped our bed, searching the mattress for evidence of violence. One officer spent 20 minutes in our walk-in closet, measuring the empty spaces where Adam's clothes had been, as if the missing garments were somehow suspicious rather than proof of his voluntary departure. Meanwhile, neighbors gathered on their porches and sidewalks, watching the spectacle unfold. Mrs. Henderson, who'd always been so friendly, stood in her yard openly recording the scene with her phone. The Johnsons from across the street whispered to each other while pointing at our house. Even families I'd known for years stared with a mixture of curiosity and judgment that made my skin crawl. The worst moment came when Kyle's school bus dropped him off in the middle of the chaos. My 18-year-old son walked up our driveway to find uniformed officers carrying evidence bags out of his childhood home. The look of devastation on his face as he realized his family was being treated like criminals will haunt me forever. "Mom?" he said quietly, standing frozen on our front porch. "What's happening?" Before I could answer, Detective Morgan appeared beside us. "Kyle Thompson? We'd like to ask you a few questions about your father's disappearance." "I already told Officer Martinez everything I know," Kyle replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, we'd like you to tell us again," she said, guiding him toward one of the police cars. Watching them interrogate my son in the backseat of a patrol car while neighbors gawked was almost more than I could bear. Kyle emerged 20 minutes later looking pale and shaken, having been questioned about our family dynamics, his parents' relationship, and whether he'd witnessed any domestic violence in our home. The media attention started Friday morning. I woke up to find news trucks parked on our street and reporters camped outside our house. When I tried to leave for work, microphones were shoved in my face while cameras rolled. "Mrs. Thompson, did you harm your husband?" one reporter shouted. "Are you cooperating with the police investigation?" called another. What do you say to neighbors who claim your marriage was troubled? I fought through the crowd to reach my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my keys. The drive to school felt surreal, like I was living someone else's nightmare. That afternoon, Principal Wilson called me into his office with an expression of barely concealed discomfort. "Brittany," he said, avoiding eye contact, "given the current situation, the school board thinks it would be best if you took indefinite leave while this investigation continues." "I haven't been charged with anything," I protested. "I haven't even been accused of anything concrete." "I know," he said apologetically. "But parents are asking questions. They're concerned about having someone under investigation in a position of authority over their children. 15 years of dedicated service, countless students I'd helped through crises, programs I'd developed to support at-risk teenagers, all of it meaningless because of suspicions and gossip. I was being punished for being the victim of my husband's betrayal. The online harassment was even worse. Someone had created a Facebook group called Justice for Adam Thompson that treated his disappearance like a murder mystery and me as the prime suspect. Strangers analyzed photos of our family, dissected my social media posts, and shared theories about my guilt. The comments were vicious. People who'd never met me were convinced I was a cold-blooded killer who'd somehow disposed of my husband's body. Saturday morning brought the cruelest blow of all. Kyle came home from his part-time job at the hardware store with a black eye and split lip. When I demanded to know what happened, he broke down crying. "Some guys from school cornered me in the parking lot," he sobbed. "They kept calling you a husband killer, saying Dad probably ran away because he was scared of you. When I tried to defend you, they jumped me. My son was paying the price for my husband's betrayal and the community's rush to judgment." His senior year, which should have been filled with college preparations and happy memories, was being destroyed by whispers and accusations. Friends' parents were limiting their children's contact with Kyle, as if our family's trauma was somehow contagious. That night, as Kyle held an ice pack to his swollen face, he looked at me with eyes that seemed decades older than his 18 years. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think Dad is ever coming back?" I wanted to give him hope, to promise that Adam would return and explain everything. But looking at my broken son, I realized that even if Adam came back, our family was already destroyed. The trust, the security, the love we'd shared, all of it had been shattered by his selfish choices and the community's cruel judgment. "I don't know, sweetheart," I whispered, pulling him close. "But no matter what happens, we're going to get through this together." Neither of us knew that Adam's betrayal was even deeper than we'd imagined, and that the worst revelations were yet to come. The next 2 months stretched before us like an endless nightmare, each day bringing fresh humiliation while we clung to each other for survival. Our daily routines became exercises in avoiding human contact. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to go grocery shopping, hoping to avoid the neighbors who'd once been friendly but now watched me with suspicious eyes. Kyle and I communicated through text messages when reporters were camped outside, sending updates about safe routes through our own neighborhood. The phone had become our enemy. Every ring sent my heart racing. Was it news about Adam? Was it Detective Morgan with evidence that would prove my innocence or seal my fate? Was it another reporter wanting a statement, or worse, someone from the hate group that had formed online to discuss my supposed guilt? One particularly devastating call came from Adam's business partner, Mike Chin, 3 weeks after the disappearance. "Brittany," he said, his voice strained, "I hate to do this to you, but the Riverside Project is demanding answers. They're threatening to sue if Adam doesn't show up for the final walkthrough." I stared at the stack of contracts on Adam's desk, feeling overwhelmed by the technical language and legal obligations I'd never had to understand before. "Can't you handle it? You're his partner." "I'm the financial guy, not the construction expert," Mike explained apologetically. "Adam always handled the client relationships and technical aspects. Without him here to sign off on the work." His voice trailed off, leaving the implications hanging. Within a month, 3 major contracts had been cancelled. Clients who'd once praised Adam's work were now demanding refunds, worried that their projects would never be completed. The business that had taken 20 years to build was crumbling in a matter of weeks, taking our financial security with it. The stress was literally eating me alive. I'd lost 15 pounds without trying, my clothes hanging loose on a frame that felt brittle and fragile. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the house, every car door slamming in the neighborhood, Every unexpected sound sent me into panic mode. When I did manage to doze off, I'd wake up in cold sweats, my heart pounding from nightmares where police officers were dragging me away in handcuffs while Kyle screamed for his mother. Kyle was suffering just as much. His grades, which had always been solid A's and B's, plummeted to C's and D's. College acceptance letters that should have brought celebration instead gathered dust on his desk, ignored amid the chaos of our destroyed lives. His few remaining friends would text occasionally, but their parents had clearly warned them to keep their distance from our troubled family. We started eating dinner in my bedroom with the curtains drawn, hiding from the reporters who still occasionally drove by looking for a story. Kyle would sit cross-legged on the carpet with his plate balanced on his knees, both of us too exhausted to maintain normal family rituals. "Do you think he's really dead?" Kyle asked one evening, poking at his microwaved dinner without eating. "I don't know, sweetheart," I replied, though privately I'd begun to hope Adam was dead rather than face the alternative, that he'd abandoned us willingly and left us to deal with the consequences of his disappearance. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in early March, 2 months and 1 week after Adam had vanished. I was checking our mailbox reluctantly, dreading the usual collection of bills we couldn't pay and legal notices about the failing business. Mixed in with the junk mail was a plain white envelope with no return address, but the handwriting on the front made my hands start shaking immediately. It was Adam's careful script, the same handwriting that had signed our wedding certificate, written love notes during our early marriage, and addressed 22 years' worth of anniversary cards. My name was written in blue ink across the front. Mrs. Brittany Thompson. I stood in our driveway holding that envelope like it contained a bomb that might explode and finish destroying what was left of our lives. Part of me wanted to tear it up without reading it, to preserve whatever small hope remained that Adam had been kidnapped or was suffering from amnesia or any explanation that didn't involve deliberate abandonment. But I had to know. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded 2 sheets of notebook paper. The first words I read should have brought relief. "Brittany, I'm alive and well." Instead, they filled me with a rage so pure and hot that I actually saw red spots dancing across my vision. He was alive. Safe. Well, while Kyle and I had been living in hell, while police treated me like a criminal, while our community turned against us and our lives fell apart, Adam had been perfectly fine somewhere else. I continued reading, and his casual tone made everything worse. He wrote about his new life in Florida as if he were sending a vacation postcard rather than explaining why he'd destroyed his family. He described the weather, the beautiful beaches, and how refreshing it was to start over somewhere new. "I know this is hard to understand," he wrote, "but I was suffocating in our old life. I felt trapped by expectations and routines that no longer served who I was becoming. I needed to break free and finally start living authentically." Living authentically. As if our 22-year marriage had been some kind of performance he'd grown tired of maintaining. As if Kyle and I were obstacles to his personal growth rather than the family he'd promised to love and protect. But the paragraph that made me collapse onto our kitchen floor was the one about his soulmate. Adam wrote about finding true love, with someone who understood his deepest needs, and challenged him intellectually in ways he'd never experienced. My legs gave out as I read the name, Sophia Williams. Our son's girlfriend. The 19-year-old girl who'd sat at our dinner table, complimented my cooking, and asked thoughtful questions about Kyle's future. The young woman I'd welcomed into our home, worried about when she didn't eat enough, and even bought Christmas presents for last December. Every memory from the past 6 months suddenly rearranged itself in my mind. Sophia's mature questions about our marriage hadn't been innocent curiosity, they'd been intelligence gathering for Adam. Her interest in his construction projects hadn't been academic fascination, it had been romantic pursuit. Every family dinner, every car ride, every moment of kindness I'd shown her had been part of an elaborate deception designed to destroy my son's heart and steal my husband. I remembered Sophia helping me wash dishes after family dinners, asking personal questions about what made our marriage work. "You and Mr. Thompson seem so happy," she'd said one evening, drying plates while I scrubbed pots. "What's your secret?" At the time, I'd been flattered by her interest in learning about healthy relationships. Now I realized she'd been studying us, learning Adam's preferences and vulnerabilities so she could exploit them. The cruelest detail in Adam's letter was his announcement about Sophia's pregnancy. "We're expecting a baby in September," he wrote with obvious pride. "Finally, I'll have a chance to be a father to a child who will grow up in a home filled with authentic love and mutual respect. The implication was clear. Our home hadn't been filled with authentic love. Kyle hadn't grown up with a father who respected his family. Everything I'd believed about our marriage and family had been a lie in Adam's mind. I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching that letter while doing mental calculations that made me sick. If Sophia was due in September and it was now March, she'd gotten pregnant around Christmas. I remembered that holiday season. Adam had been particularly attentive, bringing me flowers and suggesting romantic dinners. All while he was carrying on an affair with our son's teenage girlfriend. The sound of Kyle's key in the front door snapped me back to reality. He was home early from his part-time job, probably because he couldn't concentrate any better than I could. I heard his backpack hit the floor and his footsteps approaching the kitchen. "Mom," he called. "You okay? You look..." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the letter in my hands and the devastation on my face. Kyle had grown up so much in the past 2 months, learning to read my expressions and emotions in ways that broke my heart. "Is it from Dad?" he asked quietly, settling beside me on the floor. I nodded, unable to speak. Kyle gently took the letter from my shaking hands and began reading. I watched his face change as he processed each horrible revelation, relief turning to confusion, confusion to betrayal, betrayal to pure anguish. When he reached the part about Sophia, Kyle made a sound I'd never heard before, a broken moan that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. The letter fluttered to the floor as he buried his face in his hands. "She never loved me," he whispered through his fingers. "It was all fake. Everything we shared, everything I felt, it was just a game to get closer to Dad." I pulled my son into my arms while he sobbed with the kind of heartbreak that changes a person forever. Kyle wasn't just mourning the loss of his first love anymore. He was grieving the death of his innocence, his trust in adults, and his faith in the possibility of authentic human connection. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked through his tears. "Was I such a terrible boyfriend that she had to find someone better? Someone older and more sophisticated?" "No, sweetheart," I said fiercely, stroking his hair while my own rage crystallized into something cold and hard. "You did nothing wrong. They're the ones who chose to destroy our family." As I held my broken son, I felt something shift inside me. The grief and shock that had consumed me for 2 months was transforming into determination. Adam and Sophia thought they could destroy our lives and walk away to their perfect new beginning. They believed they could leave Kyle and me to pick up the pieces while they played house with their stolen happiness. They were wrong. That single thought echoed in my mind as I helped Kyle to his feet and guided him to the couch. While he curled up under a blanket, exhausted from his emotional breakdown, I picked up Adam's letter from the kitchen floor and read it again. This time, instead of devastation, I felt something else entirely: cold, calculating fury. "Mom." Kyle's voice was hoarse from crying. "What are we going to do?" I looked at my son, this beautiful young man whose trust had been shattered by the 2 people who should have protected him most. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. "We're going to make them pay," I said quietly. The next morning, while Kyle was at school trying to salvage what remained of his senior year, I began transforming Adam's home office into something he never could have imagined, a war room dedicated to his destruction. I started by gathering every piece of information I could find about their new life. Adam's letter had mentioned Florida, but he'd been vague about specifics. However, years of living with him had taught me his patterns, his preferences, and his weaknesses. Adam loved the beach but hated crowds, preferred upscale neighborhoods but wasn't flashy about wealth, and always chose locations with good golf courses nearby. Using skills I'd never needed as a guidance counselor, I learned to navigate social media like a digital detective. Sophia's Instagram account, which she'd probably assumed was safely hidden from her past life, became my primary source of intelligence. Though she'd blocked Kyle and changed her username, she hadn't thought to make her account completely private. Her posts told the story of their stolen paradise. Photos of sunset dinners at waterfront restaurants, morning coffee on a balcony overlooking the ocean, and casual shots of Adam looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen him in years. The casual cruelty of their public happiness while Kyle and I suffered in the aftermath of their betrayal fueled my determination. Using reverse image searches and location tracking tools I found through online tutorials, I began mapping their new life. The restaurant in Sophia's food photos was the Coral Reef Grill in Naples, Florida. The beach in their romantic sunset pictures was Vanderbilt Beach. The distinctive Spanish-style architecture visible in their balcony shots narrowed down their neighborhood to an exclusive waterfront development. Within 2 weeks, I'd identified their exact address through property records. Adam had purchased a $400,000 beach condo using funds from our joint savings account, money I'd thought was earmarked for Kyle's college education and our retirement. The betrayal cut deeper knowing he'd stolen our future to fund his midlife crisis. I printed every social media post, every photo, every casual comment that revealed details about their daily routines. The walls of Adam's former office became covered with timeline charts tracking their relationship, maps of their new neighborhood, and copies of financial documents that proved his theft. Friends would have called it obsessive, but it felt like survival. Meanwhile, I began consulting with attorneys to understand my legal options. The first lawyer, Patricia Chin, was sympathetic but discouraging. "Adultery is painful, but it's rarely profitable in court," she explained during our initial consultation. "Florida is a no-fault divorce state, which limits your recovery options." The second attorney, James Morrison, was more helpful. He explained alienation of affection laws, which would allow me to sue Sophia for deliberately interfering with my marriage. "It's an old law, but it's still valid," he said, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. "If we can prove she intentionally seduced your husband to destroy your marriage, you could recover significant damages." But it was the third lawyer, Sarah Davidson, who gave me the ammunition I needed for real justice. Sarah specialized in white-collar crime and civil fraud cases. As I laid out the financial evidence of Adam's theft, the unauthorized property purchase, the business funds he'd diverted, the contracts he'd abandoned, her eyes lit up with professional interest. "This isn't just adultery," she said, studying bank statements and property records. "This is systematic financial fraud. He stole marital assets, abandoned business obligations, and left you liable for debts he created. We can pursue criminal charges for theft and fraud, civil suits for damages, and asset recovery actions that could bankrupt them both." The more I learned about the legal weapons at my disposal, the more empowered I felt. While Detective Morgan had treated me like a criminal, my own investigation was revealing that Adam and Sophia were the real lawbreakers. Digging deeper into our finances revealed betrayals I hadn't imagined. Adam had opened credit cards in my name without my knowledge, using them to fund romantic getaways and expensive gifts for Sophia. He'd taken out a second mortgage on our house, using our home equity to build his escape fund while leaving me responsible for payments I couldn't afford. The systematic nature of his deception became clear through bank records and credit reports. Starting 8 months before his disappearance, around the time Kyle first brought Sophia home, Adam had begun moving money, opening accounts, and creating the financial infrastructure for his new life. One particularly devastating discovery was a safe deposit box I'd never known existed. Using my authority as his legal spouse, I gained access and found it cleaned out except for a single document, a will Adam had drafted but never signed, leaving everything to my beloved Sophia Williams and our future children. The casual dismissal of Kyle and me in that draft document revealed the depth of his emotional abandonment. But understanding Adam's financial crimes was only part of my strategy. I also began studying him psychologically, analyzing his personality and weaknesses to design revenge that would hurt him most effectively. Adam's greatest vulnerability was his pride. He'd always cared deeply about his reputation in the community, his image as a successful businessman and devoted family man. The public humiliation of being exposed as a thief and predator would devastate him more than any financial penalty. I researched Sophia's background with equal thoroughness. Her wealthy family in Georgia, her prestigious university connections, her carefully cultivated image as a promising young professional, all of it would crumble if her role in our family's destruction became public knowledge. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in April, 3 weeks into my investigation. While monitoring Sophia's social media accounts, I found something that made my heart race with excitement: an engagement announcement. Adam Thompson and Sophia Williams are thrilled to announce their engagement and upcoming wedding in Savannah, Georgia. The post read, accompanied by a photo of Sophia's massive diamond ring purchased, no doubt, with money stolen from Kyle's college fund. But the real gift was the wedding date and venue information. They were planning a June ceremony at the historic Savannah Foundation's elegant downtown chapel, followed by a reception at the exclusive Chatham Club. Sophia's wealthy family was clearly sparing no expense for their daughter's society wedding. As I stared at that announcement, everything clicked into place. This wasn't just their celebration, it was my opportunity for perfect justice. They'd chosen to make their stolen happiness public, which meant I could make their destruction equally public. I began researching the venue, the guest list possibilities, and the local media coverage such a high-profile wedding would attract. Sophia's family connections in Savannah meant photographers and society reporters would be documenting every moment of their special day. The irony was beautiful. They'd stolen my family's happiness in secret, but they wanted to celebrate their stolen love in front of everyone who mattered to them. I would give them the public attention they craved, just not in the way they expected. For the first time since finding Adam's abandonment note, I smiled with genuine satisfaction. Their wedding day would indeed be unforgettable, just not for the reasons they anticipated. Justice was coming, and it would be perfectly legal, utterly devastating, and completely public. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, June 15th, which gave me exactly 6 weeks to finalize every detail of my plan. I chose my outfit with the same care a general selects battle armor. The black dress I found at Nordstrom was elegant but severe, professional yet unmistakably funereal. When I tried it on in the fitting room, the sales associate commented that it was perfect for formal occasions. If only she knew how formal this particular occasion would be. The 4-hour drive to Savannah felt both endless and too short. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white, and I found myself rehearsing my speech aloud to the empty car. Every word had to be perfect, every phrase calculated for maximum impact. I'd practiced in front of my bedroom mirror for weeks, timing each section to ensure I could deliver the entire revelation before security could escort me out. "I object," I said to my reflection in the rearview mirror as I stopped for gas outside Macon. "I object because the groom is still legally married to me, making this ceremony an act of bigamy." The words felt powerful on my tongue, carrying the weight of 22 years of marriage and months of systematic betrayal. By the time I reached Savannah's historic district, I could recite my entire speech without hesitation, each devastating revelation flowing seamlessly into the next. I checked into the Hampton Inn downtown, a modest hotel that seemed appropriate for a woman whose husband had stolen her financial security. In the bathroom mirror, I applied my makeup with surgical precision, enough to look polished and professional, not enough to appear vain or frivolous. This wasn't about beauty, it was about justice. The historic Savannah Foundation Chapel was everything I'd expected from Sophia's privileged background: pristine white columns, stained glass windows that caught the afternoon sunlight, and an air of old Southern money that made my middle-class origins feel obvious. Wedding guests were already arriving in expensive cars, women in designer dresses and men in custom suits that probably cost more than Kyle's monthly college expenses. I slipped inside during the pre-ceremony mingling, accepting a program from an usher who smiled politely and directed me toward the bride's side. Ironic, considering I was probably the only person there who truly understood what kind of woman Sophia really was. Finding a seat near the back, I observed the crowd with the analytical eye I'd developed during months of investigation. Sophia's family dominated the front rows, distinguished older couples who carried themselves with the confidence that comes from generational wealth. Her mother, a thin woman with perfect posture and pearls, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Her father, silver-haired and stern-faced, checked his expensive watch repeatedly. These people had no idea their daughter was a homewrecker who'd seduced a married man twice her age and destroyed his family in the process. To them, Adam was probably a successful businessman who'd swept their daughter off her feet with his maturity and stability. They had no clue he was a thief and an abandoner who'd left his teenage son heartbroken and his wife facing criminal investigation. The ceremony began with classical music that echoed beautifully through the chapel. Bridesmaids in pale pink dresses walked down the aisle, followed by what I assumed was Sophia's younger sister as maid of honor. Then came the bride herself, and I had to admit she looked stunning. Sophia wore what was clearly a designer gown, layers of silk and lace that probably cost more than most people's cars. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elegant style that showcased her graceful neck, and her smile radiated the kind of joy that should only come from pure, honest love. The irony made my stomach turn. Adam stood at the altar looking more handsome than I'd seen him in years. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his hair styled, his face glowing with happiness that had been purchased with stolen money and built on destroyed lives. When Sophia reached him, he took her hands with the same gentle reverence he'd once shown me on our wedding day. The minister, an elderly man with kind eyes who clearly had no idea he was about to officiate a ceremony built on lies, began the traditional service. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Adam and Sophia in holy matrimony. I listened to the familiar words with growing anticipation, waiting for my moment. The ceremony proceeded through readings, vows, and ring exchanges while I sat perfectly still, my folder of legal documents resting on my lap like a loaded weapon. Finally, the minister reached the crucial moment. If any person present knows of any lawful impediment why these two should not be joined in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The chapel fell silent except for the sound of my chair creaking as I stood up. Every head turned toward me, confusion rippling through the crowd as they tried to place the unexpected guest in black who was disrupting their perfect ceremony. I object, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent chapel with the authority of absolute truth. Sophia's face went pale beneath her professional makeup. Adam's confident smile froze, then crumbled as recognition dawned in his eyes. I began walking toward the front of the chapel, my heels clicking against the marble floor with each measured step. I object, I continued, because the groom is still legally married to me, making this ceremony an act of bigamy under Georgia state law. Gasps echoed through the chapel. Sophia's mother dropped her handkerchief. Her father half rose from his seat, his face flushed with confusion and anger. I reached the front of the chapel and turned to face the crowd, speaking with the same calm authority I'd used to address school board meetings and parent conferences. I also object because the bride is carrying my husband's child, conceived while she was dating my 18-year-old son. The same son who is at home today, contemplating ending his life because of the betrayal by these two people he trusted most. The silence shattered into chaos. Wedding guests began talking at once, their voices rising in shock and outrage. Sophia dropped her bouquet, the expensive flowers scattering across the altar steps. Adam stepped toward me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued, raising my voice above the commotion, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Brittany Thompson, Adam's wife of 22 years and the mother of the son whose girlfriend they stole. I opened my folder and pulled out the legal documents I'd prepared so carefully. Adam Thompson, you're being served with divorce papers citing adultery, abandonment, and financial fraud. Sophia Williams, you're being served with a lawsuit for alienation of affection and intentional interference with my marriage. Adam found his voice at last. Brittany, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I cut him off. I understand that you stole over $200,000 from our joint accounts to fund this relationship. I understand that you abandoned business contracts, leaving your clients without recourse. I understand that you let our son believe his girlfriend dumped him when actually you seduced her away from him. Sophia's father stood up, his face red with rage. What is the meaning of this? Who are you to disrupt my daughter's wedding? I'm the woman whose family your daughter destroyed for sport, I replied calmly. While you planned this expensive ceremony, my son has been in therapy trying to understand why his first love abandoned him. What you're celebrating today is built on the ruins of a teenage boy's trust and a family's 22-year marriage. The minister, clearly overwhelmed by the situation, stepped forward. Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until this matter can be resolved. There's nothing to resolve, I said firmly. These two have been living together as an unmarried couple while he remains legally married to me. Any ceremony performed today would be invalid under state law. I turned back to Adam and Sophia, who stood frozen at the altar like actors who'd forgotten their lines. You'll be hearing from my attorney about the criminal fraud charges. You'll also be paying child support for Kyle's emotional damages and restitution for the business contracts you abandoned. The financial theft alone is grounds for felony charges, I announced to the room. The abandonment of business obligations has left multiple families without completed homes and contractors without payment. This isn't just adultery, it's systematic fraud. With that, I turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving chaos in my wake. Behind me, I could hear Sophia crying, Adam attempting explanations that fell on deaf ears, and angry family members demanding answers. As I reached the chapel doors, I paused and looked back at the destruction I'd wrought. Their perfect day had become a courtroom, their joyful celebration transformed into public judgment. For the first time in months, I felt truly satisfied. Justice had been served, and it tasted exactly as sweet as I'd imagined. As I drove away from the chapel, my phone began buzzing incessantly in my purse. By the time I reached my hotel, I had 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. The first call I returned was from Channel 7 News, the same station that had run sensational stories about Adam's mysterious disappearance 3 months earlier. Now reporter Jennifer Hayes was breathless with excitement about getting an exclusive interview with the woman who'd crashed Savannah's most talked-about wedding. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "our viewers need to hear your side of this incredible story. Would you be willing to do a live interview tonight?" For months, the media had treated me like a criminal suspect, speculating about my role in Adam's disappearance and painting me as unstable and potentially dangerous. Now they wanted to give me a platform to tell the truth. The irony was delicious. "I'll do the interview," I said, "but only if you're prepared to discuss the real crime here, Adam's financial fraud and abandonment of his family responsibilities." Within 2 hours, I was sitting in the hotel lobby doing a live television interview that would be picked up by news stations across Georgia and Florida. Jennifer Hayes listened with genuine shock as I detailed Adam's systematic theft of our marital assets, his manipulation of our teenage son, and Sophia's calculated seduction of a married man. "So you're saying your husband didn't disappear, he stole money and ran away with your son's girlfriend?" Jennifer asked, her professional composure barely containing her amazement. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied calmly. "While police were investigating me for potential violence, my husband was living on stolen money with a 19-year-old girl who'd broken my son's heart as part of their affair." The interview went viral within hours. Social media exploded with support for Kyle and me, with thousands of comments expressing outrage at Adam and Sophia's betrayal. The hashtag Justice for Britney began trending, accompanied by posts praising my courage in exposing their deception publicly. But the sweetest moment came when I called Kyle from my hotel room that evening. "Mom," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice for the first time in months, "everyone's seen the news. People are finally understanding what really happened to us." His relief was palpable through the phone. For months, Kyle had endured whispers and suspicious looks from classmates who thought his family was somehow tainted by scandal. Now the truth was out and public opinion had shifted completely in our favor. "Mrs. Patterson called," Kyle continued excitedly. "She wanted to apologize for avoiding us and invite us to Sunday dinner. And Mr. Chin from Dad's old construction company wants to talk about hiring me for summer work. He said any son of yours must be a good kid who deserves a chance." The legal victories began rolling in even faster than I'd anticipated. Monday morning brought a call from Sarah Davidson, my attorney, with news that made me actually laugh out loud. "Adam's lawyer called this morning wanting to negotiate a settlement," she said, barely containing her own amusement. "Apparently, your little chapel performance has made him very eager to resolve this quietly." "What kind of settlement?" I asked, though I already knew I held all the cards. "Full restitution of the stolen funds, plus damages for business losses, plus compensation for emotional distress to you and Kyle. We're talking about nearly $500,000, Brittany. He's also agreed to invalidate the bigamous marriage, surrender all claims to marital property, and accept responsibility for child support." The bigamy charges had created legal chaos for Adam and Sophia that extended far beyond their embarrassment. Their wedding was legally void, meaning they'd have to return thousands of dollars in gifts to humiliated family members. The exclusive country club that had hosted their reception was demanding payment for damages to their reputation. Sophia's family was threatening to cut her off financially unless she ended the relationship with the man who'd made them a laughingstock of Savannah society. More satisfying was learning about the criminal investigation that had been triggered by my public accusations. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation was now examining Adam's business practices, his tax filings, and his abandonment of construction contracts. His contractor's license had been suspended pending the outcome of multiple fraud charges. "He'll never work in construction again," Sarah explained during one of our meetings. "The professional liability alone has destroyed his reputation in the industry." Even if he avoids jail time, he's facing years of civil lawsuits from clients whose projects he abandoned. The paternity test results, when they came in 2 weeks later, confirmed what we all knew: Sophia's baby was indeed Adam's. The court ordered him to pay child support, but more importantly, it legally documented his adultery and provided additional evidence for our fraud case. Meanwhile, back home, our community's attitude toward Kyle and me had transformed completely. The same neighbors who'd crossed the street to avoid me were now bringing casseroles and offering to help with yard work. Our mailbox filled with cards from church members expressing support and apologies for doubting us. The most meaningful vindication came when Pastor Williams asked me to speak at a special Sunday service about forgiveness and justice. Standing at the same pulpit where Adam and I had been held up as an example of Christian marriage, I shared our story of betrayal and recovery. Sometimes, I told the congregation, turning the other cheek means ensuring that wrongdoers face consequences for their actions. True forgiveness doesn't require enabling continued harm. The standing ovation that followed felt like a baptism, washing away months of shame and suspicion. Kyle's healing journey became my greatest source of pride. He started seeing Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a therapist who specialized in adolescent trauma, and began processing his father's abandonment in healthy ways. "I'm learning that Dad's choices say nothing about my worth as a person," Kyle told me after one of his sessions. "Dr. Martinez says that people who truly love you don't disappear when things get complicated." His college plans evolved too. Instead of staying close to home as originally planned, Kyle chose to attend Georgia Tech, 3 hours away, where he could start fresh without the baggage of our family's public ordeal. "I want to study engineering like Dad always suggested," he said, "but I want to build things that last, not abandon projects when I get bored." The wisdom in his words brought tears to my eyes. Despite everything Adam had done to hurt him, Kyle was choosing to take the positive lessons and leave behind the toxic patterns. By August, we'd settled into a new normal that felt healthier than anything we'd experienced during the final years of my marriage. The settlement money had erased our debts and restored Kyle's college fund. I'd returned to my counseling position with renewed passion, helping other students navigate family crises with the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd survived betrayal and emerged stronger. The house itself became a symbol of our recovery. I redecorated Adam's former office, transforming it from a war room back into a peaceful space for reading and reflection. Kyle and I painted the kitchen together, choosing colors that felt fresh and hopeful rather than burdened by painful memories. Most importantly, we'd both learned to trust our instincts about people and relationships. The experience had been devastating, but it had also made us stronger, more honest, and more appreciative of genuine connections. Adam and Sophia's paradise, meanwhile, had crumbled under the weight of legal consequences and social disgrace. Justice wasn't just served, it was a feast that would sustain us for years to come. But the real transformation began when I realized that surviving their betrayal had given me something invaluable: the ability to help others navigate similar devastation. Returning to my counseling position that fall felt like stepping into a completely new career, even though I was walking into the same office I'd occupied for 15 years. My colleagues treated me differently now, not with pity, but with a respect that came from witnessing someone survive the unthinkable and emerge stronger rather than bitter. "Brittany," Principal Wilson said during my first week back, "I've never seen students respond to a counselor the way they're responding to you now. There's something different about how you connect with them." He was right. Students who'd previously seen me as just another adult authority figure now sought me out specifically when facing family crises. Word had spread about my experience, and teenagers dealing with divorce, infidelity, or abandonment found comfort in speaking with someone who truly understood their pain. Jessica Martinez, a junior whose father had left for a younger woman, sat in my office one October afternoon with tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "everyone keeps telling me it's not my fault, but how do you actually believe that? How do you stop feeling like you did something wrong?" I looked at this beautiful, broken girl and saw Kyle's face from those dark months when he'd questioned everything about himself. "Jessica," I said gently, "the hardest lesson I learned is that some people are capable of extraordinary selfishness. Your father's choices reveal his character, not yours. The fact that you're sitting here asking these questions shows you have more integrity at 16 than he's shown at 40. These conversations led me to develop new programs at school focused on recognizing manipulation and building healthy relationship boundaries. Using my painful education, I created workshops teaching students to identify grooming behaviors, understand the warning signs of inappropriate relationships, and trust their instincts when something felt wrong. The response was overwhelming. Parents requested additional sessions. Other school districts asked me to present my materials to their counseling staff. Within a year, I was traveling to conferences across the state, sharing my expertise on family trauma and recovery. Your story has transformed how I approach counseling, Dr. Angela Roberts told me after a presentation in Atlanta. You've shown us that surviving betrayal doesn't make someone damaged, it makes them wise. Meanwhile, Kyle was thriving at Georgia Tech in ways that filled my heart with pride and amazement. Our weekly phone calls had become the highlight of my week, hearing about his academic success and social growth. "Mom," he said during one October call, his voice bright with excitement, "I've decided to double major in engineering and psychology. I want to understand how things work, both machines and people." His choice of psychology as a focus made perfect sense. Kyle had lived through the kind of family trauma that many therapists only read about in textbooks. His lived experience, combined with his natural empathy and intelligence, would make him an extraordinary counselor someday. But what moved me most was hearing about his first serious relationship since Sophia. Emma Chin was a sophomore studying education, and from Kyle's descriptions she was everything Sophia had pretended to be: kind, genuine, and interested in Kyle for who he really was rather than what he could provide. "She knows about everything that happened," Kyle told me during one of our calls. "I was terrified to tell her about Dad and Sophia, but she just listened and then said it made sense why I was so mature for my age. She said going through something like that and still being able to trust people showed real strength." The wisdom in Emma's response brought tears to my eyes. She understood that trauma could create depth and resilience rather than just damage. Kyle had found someone who appreciated the man he'd become through surviving his father's betrayal. "Are you happy, sweetheart?" I asked during one of our Christmas break conversations. "Yeah, Mom," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I'm actually excited about the future. And I'm grateful for how you fought for us. Watching you stand up to Dad and Sophia taught me that letting people walk all over you isn't kindness, it's enabling." The personal growth I'd experienced was perhaps the most unexpected gift from our ordeal. I'd always been trusting to a fault, assuming the best in people and dismissing red flags out of loyalty or wishful thinking. Now I possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense when someone was being manipulative or dishonest. At a church potluck dinner, I watched Sandra Williams, a new member, work the room with the same calculated charm I'd seen Sophia use on our family. She asked probing personal questions, complimented people excessively, and seemed particularly interested in the wealthy widower, Mr. Patterson. "Be careful with that one," I quietly warned Mrs. Henderson. "She's hunting, not socializing." 2 months later, Sandra was caught stealing from the church collection and attempting to manipulate Mr. Patterson into changing his will. My instincts had been correct, and several congregation members thanked me for the warning. This newfound ability to spot predatory behavior led me to become an unofficial advocate for other betrayed spouses in our community. Word spread that I could help people navigate the legal and emotional challenges of infidelity and abandonment. My living room became an informal support group where women shared their stories and learned from each other's experiences. "You saved my life," Margaret Foster told me after I helped her document her husband's financial infidelity before filing for divorce. "Without your guidance, I would have lost everything." Working with local attorneys, I helped educate people about alienation of affection laws, asset protection strategies, and documentation techniques that could prevent the kind of devastation Adam had inflicted on our family. Knowledge truly was power, and I was determined to arm other victims with the tools they needed to fight back. But perhaps my most important advocacy work involved speaking publicly about age-inappropriate relationships and grooming behaviors. Too many parents missed the warning signs that I'd ignored when Adam began pursuing Sophia. At PTA meetings and community forums, I shared our story to help protect other families from similar destruction. "Predators don't always look like monsters," I explained to a packed auditorium of concerned parents. "Sometimes they look like your husband, your friend, or your child's boyfriend's father. They gain access through trust and familiarity, then exploit that access to destroy families. The long-term consequences for Adam and Sophia continued to unfold in ways that proved justice could be both swift and enduring. Updates filtered back through mutual acquaintances and social media, painting a picture of two people whose moment of selfish passion had cost them decades of consequences. Adam's construction career was permanently destroyed. The criminal fraud charges had resulted in probation, community service, and a requirement to pay restitution to abandoned clients. His contractor's license was revoked, and his reputation in the industry was so damaged that he couldn't find work even as a day laborer. Sophia's family had indeed cut her off financially, disgusted by the scandal she'd brought to their name. Her college education remained unfinished, her career prospects limited by her association with the fraud case. The passionate love affair that had seemed worth destroying our family for proved unable to survive the stress of real-world consequences. "I heard they're both working at a discount furniture store in Jacksonville," Kyle told me during one of our calls, his tone matter-of-fact rather than vindictive. "Apparently their relationship is pretty rocky. Turns out passion built on betraying other people doesn't make for a stable foundation." The peace I felt hearing this news wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Adam and Sophia had made choices that devastated innocent people, and they were facing the natural consequences of those choices. Meanwhile, Kyle and I had rebuilt our lives on a foundation of truth, resilience, and authentic love. As I sat in my renovated kitchen on the second anniversary of Adam's abandonment, I reflected on how completely our lives had transformed. The woman who'd once defined herself through her marriage to a man who'd never truly valued her had become someone who knew her own worth independent of any relationship. Kyle was thriving in college, building healthy relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. I was helping other families navigate trauma and rebuild their lives. Our house had become a sanctuary of genuine peace rather than a facade hiding dysfunction. Some betrayals are so comprehensive they strip away every illusion and force you to rebuild from the ground up. In destroying our family, Adam and Sophia had inadvertently given us the greatest gift possible, the chance to create something authentic, strong, and beautiful from the ashes of their deception. Truth, it turned out, really was the foundation of lasting happiness. 5 years later, I stood in the audience at Georgia Tech's graduation ceremony, watching Kyle walk across the stage to receive his dual degree in engineering and psychology. The young man accepting his diploma bore little resemblance to the heartbroken teenager who'd once sobbed on our kitchen floor. His shoulders were straight, his smile genuine, and when he spotted me in the crowd, he gave a small wave that made my heart soar. Beside me, Emma squeezed my hand excitedly. They'd been engaged for 6 months now, and I couldn't have chosen a better daughter-in-law if I'd handpicked her myself. After graduation, Kyle would start his master's program in family therapy while Emma began her teaching career. They'd found a small apartment near campus, their first home together built on honesty and mutual respect. "He's going to make an incredible therapist," Emma whispered as Kyle descended the stage. "He has this way of making people feel understood." I nodded, thinking about the support group Kyle had started on campus for students from divorced families. His lived experience with betrayal and recovery had already helped dozens of young people navigate their own family trauma. Later that evening at Kyle's graduation dinner, he raised his glass in a toast. "To Mom," he said, his voice steady and strong, "who taught me that surviving the worst thing that can happen to you doesn't make you a victim, it makes you a warrior." As I looked around the table at these beautiful people who'd become my chosen family, I realized that Adam's betrayal had been a twisted gift. In destroying our old life, he'd forced us to build something authentic and unbreakable. Some stories don't end with forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes they end with something better: the knowledge that you survived, thrived, and used your pain to protect others from similar devastation. Truth had indeed become the foundation of our lasting happiness. If this story of betrayal, justice, and healing touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment? Brittany's courage at the wedding or Kyle's incredible transformation? Please like this video if it moved you and subscribe for more powerful true stories of survival and triumph. Your support means everything.